The young and the restless spoilers for weeks, an eerie stillness had settled over Genoa City, the kind of calm that always preceded a storm too big to contain. Behind every closed door and carefully composed smile, secrets seethed like a slow-boiling poison, waiting for the precise moment to erupt. And at the center of this impending detonation stood Kane Ashby, a man many believed had already been defeated, disgraced by international trials, convicted, exposed. But few understood that for men like Kane, a courtroom loss was not a conclusion. It was merely a distraction, a shifting of gears, a pause in the performance. What Kane had built across continents, in hushed meetings and forged identities, was not a flimsy criminal scheme, it was a long game of power, of truth manipulated into silence, and silence turned into leverage. So when he returned to Genoa City, assembling a strange circle of both enemies and reluctant allies, the town's elite should have known, Kane wasn't finished. He was just beginning his final act. What no one expected was that his target wasn't Chancellor Winters. It wasn't Devon. It wasn't even Jill. It was Victoria Newman. And the reason was far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Kane had watched from the shadows as Victoria, still raw from heartbreak and desperate for redemption, welcomed back two ghosts from her past, Claire and Cole. A daughter she never got to raise, a man she once believed had shared a soul-deep connection with her. Together, they represented the kind of healing that was rare in a family like the Newmans, wounds soothed by reunion, not vengeance. But Kane had seen this story before, and he knew how it ended. Because Kane hadn't just heard of Claire. He had known her. Years before, in a different city under a different name, she had been part of a grift that had brought down entire investment circles. Claire Grace, if that was even her real name, had not been a lost child or a confused soul, she had been a master manipulator, raised under the tutelage of one of the most notorious con artists Kane had ever encountered, Jordan. Jordan's methods were subtle, her voice honey-sweet, her schemes layered so deeply in sentimentality that victims never saw the blade until it was buried in their backs. Claire had been her protégée, her daughter not just by blood but by criminal philosophy. They didn't steal money. They stole trust. Identity. Legacy. And now they had their claws in the Newmans. Cole was not innocent either. Whether he had been seduced by ideology or guilt, he had become Jordan's loyal accomplice, his role always to appear sincere, wounded, familiar. Kane had watched them enter Genoa City like saints, watched them be embraced as family, watched the walls of the Newman fortress soften with hope. And it sickened him. Not because he had any particular love for the Newmans, but because no one, not even Victoria, deserved to be manipulated into rewriting her trauma as joy, only to have it shattered again. So Kane set his plan in motion, this time not with money or blackmail, but with something more powerful, knowledge. He began contacting those who had once fallen victim to Claire and Jordan, gathering statements, photos, surveillance footage from years ago, even a confession from a private investigator who had tracked the duo through Europe and the Midwest under aliases too many to count. It was a delicate line to walk, exposing the fraud without becoming the villain, but Kane had nothing left to lose. His name was already stained. His reputation already burned. What remained was the truth, and with it, a shot at redemption he never expected to claim for himself. The event was unassuming at first. A charity gala hosted by Newman Enterprises, themed around legacy and family, drawing in the city's most powerful. Victoria stood at the center of it all, radiant, calm, a woman who had finally begun to believe she could live without the constant ache of mistrust. Claire was by her side, gracious and poised, while Cole moved through the crowd like a diplomat returned from exile. But when Kane entered, uninvited, unannounced, holding a manila envelope thicker than a scandal sheet, the temperature in the room dropped. He didn't shout. He didn't beg for attention. He simply handed the envelope to Nick and said, "You should see this before you toast to the future." What followed unraveled everything. Inside the envelope were photos of Claire, years ago, laughing outside a courthouse under another name. Affidavits. Arrest records sealed in another state. Footage of Jordan introducing her as her daughter in a scam seminar filmed in Chicago. A letter from a former accomplice describing how Claire could cry on command and recite tragic backstories like monologues. And at the bottom? Kane's own statement, handwritten, unflinching, explaining why he'd stayed silent until now, and why he couldn't anymore. Nick's hands trembled as he read. Nikki's face paled. And Victoria froze. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just turned slowly to Claire, whose breath hitched as the room collapsed around her. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was too precise, too damning. She simply broke, right there in the middle of the ballroom, whispering words no one expected. It started as a lie. But it became real. I didn't know how to stop. Victoria's voice cracked for the first time in years when she asked, "Are you my daughter?" And Claire's response was a sob, "I wanted to be." The DNA results came the next morning. Negative. Claire was not Victoria's daughter. Not by blood. Not by history. And yet the pain that ripped through Victoria felt no different than if she had lost her all over again. Claire had embedded herself so deeply into the Newman family that even the truth felt like a betrayal. She cried. She pleaded. She insisted that she had changed, that she had fallen in love with the family, that she had wanted to tell the truth but couldn't find the courage. She begged Victoria not to erase the bond they had built. But Victoria was no stranger to betrayal. She had once believed Ashland. She had once believed JT. And now, she had believed Claire. Each time, she had given her heart, and each time, it had been used as a weapon against her. Newman Enterprises entered lockdown. The press frenzy was immediate. Victor refused to speak publicly. Nikki wept in private, blaming herself for wanting so badly to believe they had found their lost granddaughter. Nick took it the hardest. His protectiveness over Victoria turning into a rage that nearly exploded when he confronted Cole. But it was Victoria who bore the brunt of the fallout. She had invited a stranger into their legacy. She had defended her against doubters. She had said the words, "I love you, Claire." And now, all she could do was retreat into silence, ashamed not just of her vulnerability, but of the hope that had made it possible. Claire was taken into custody for questioning, though no official charges had been filed yet. Her legal status was murky, no crimes in Genoa, no theft, only deception. But it wasn't about legalities anymore. It was about consequences. Trust had been shattered. A family had been wounded again. And Kane, for all his moral ambiguity, had told the truth. It didn't redeem his past. It didn't erase Amanda's pain or the lives he'd broken. But in this one act, he had forced open the door to a secret too dangerous to ignore. And yet, as the storm faded into a heavy silence, one truth remained. Victoria had not lost a daughter. She had lost the illusion of one. But in that illusion, she had remembered how to love. How to hope. And now, she would have to decide whether that was a mistake, or a gift that had simply come wrapped in the wrong name. If you'd like a continuation. Perhaps Claire's fate in court, Jordan returning, or Victor planning revenge, let me know and I'll expand it further. In the days following the collapse of the charity gala and the explosive revelation of Claire's deceit, Genoa City became a town suspended in uncertainty. Whispers filled the corridors of Newman Enterprises, not just about the fraud, but about the heartbreak it left behind. Yet amid the scrutiny and judgment, the only voice Victoria Newman could hear was her own internal scream. A cry of disbelief, betrayal, and a longing so profound that even reality could not suffocate it. She had lost children before. She had been manipulated before. But this time had felt different. With Claire, something inside her had dared to awaken. A mother's instinct. A whisper of restoration. An echo of the daughter that never was. And so, even after the evidence, even after Claire's own confession, Victoria did something no one expected. She demanded another DNA test. She didn't do it out of denial, though to many it seemed like that. She did it because she needed to be sure, to strip away the possibility that someone, somewhere, had made a mistake. That maybe Claire had lied about her identity, but not about her blood. That maybe, just maybe, the young woman who had cried in her arms and called her mom in a whisper soaked in fear and longing, was not a phantom but a daughter who had been swallowed by circumstance. Victoria wasn't ready to lose her again. Not until science, untainted and inarguable, stood in her face and shattered what was left of her hope. She personally oversaw the process, choosing the lab, verifying the samples, watching each step with a scrutiny born of desperation. The technicians worked in silence, sensing the emotional storm brewing beneath Victoria's rigid exterior. It wasn't about proving Claire wrong. It was about praying for a miracle. About defying the cruel narrative that had unfolded at the hands of Kane Ashby. And Kane, watching from the edges of this implosion, was livid. He didn't understand why Victoria, a woman who had fought empires, outwitted titans, and led a multinational corporation with fire in her veins, could be so foolish now. Why she would willingly dance on the blade of a lie already exposed. When he confronted her, his tone was ice wrapped in flame. He accused her of being weak, of letting maternal instinct blind her to a truth that had already burned the room down. "Why do you want this so badly?" he demanded, his voice reverberating through the quiet hall of Newman Tower. "Why are you clinging to a girl who played you like a game of chess?" Victoria's response was barely more than a breath. "Because I need her to be real." Kane recoiled, more confused than angry now. He wasn't the kind of man who let emotion dictate logic. But Victoria wasn't clinging to logic. She was tethered to something far more dangerous, grief wrapped in hope. She looked at Claire and didn't see a con artist. She saw a child her heart had already claimed, even before DNA or documents. And that terrified Kane, because he knew what Jordan was capable of. He knew that when Claire was young, she had been trained not just to deceive, but to fill a void in others' lives so perfectly that the deception itself became intoxicating, for the victims, and eventually, even for Claire. That was the truth Claire had whispered in court when the cameras were gone and the verdicts rendered. She had fallen in love with the lie. Not because she wanted to hurt Victoria, but because for once, she wanted to be something other than a ghost. She had come into the Newman orbit with every intention of playing her role, collecting whatever secrets she could, perhaps even sabotaging from within. But what she hadn't expected was to find something resembling safety. A mother who smiled without suspicion. A grandmother who held her hand with warmth. Siblings who included her. A father figure in Cole, however fractured, who sat beside her in silence like it meant something. It had started as an act. But it had become a life. And that was why Claire confessed. Not to escape judgment. But because the shame of living a lie had become greater than the fear of punishment. When Victoria heard those words, again, whispered with tears rather than shouted in defense. Something inside her cracked open wider. Claire didn't deny the fraud. She didn't blame Jordan. She didn't spin a tale. She simply owned it. And then she knelt before the woman she had deceived and whispered through trembling lips, "I want to be your daughter. I want to earn it. Even if I'm not. Please don't let me disappear again." Victoria stood still, paralyzed not by anger but by sorrow. She knew what was right. She knew what her father would say, what Nick would scream, what public opinion had already cemented. But this wasn't about optics. It wasn't even about DNA. It was about the fact that this girl, this flawed, broken girl, had pierced a hole through her grief and filled it with something Victoria hadn't felt in years, the illusion of wholeness. And for a woman who had endured loss after loss, illusion sometimes felt more real than truth. The final test results came 2 days later. Delivered by hand. Sealed. Verified. Negative. No match. Claire was not her daughter. She had never been. The silence in the room after the envelope was opened was heavier than any scream. Claire collapsed into tears. Cole stood behind her, hands trembling. And Victoria, she didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She simply nodded, thanked the lab technician, and turned away. It wasn't rejection. It was resignation. Even now, she didn't hate Claire. She pitied her. Because deep down, she saw that Claire had fallen victim to the very con she tried to run, the one where she became the girl desperate to belong. Kane, watching all of this unfold from the corners of the room, said nothing. He had brought the truth. He had burned the illusion to the ground. But it hadn't felt like victory. It had felt like ash. Because no one had one. Not Claire. Not Victoria. Not even him. Victoria didn't banish Claire. She didn't call the police. She simply asked for space, for silence, for time. She told Claire that love, real love, was not something that could be stolen or manipulated. It had to be earned. And though Claire had lied, and hurt her, and nearly shattered everything, there was something Victoria couldn't ignore, the sincerity in Claire's pain. The devastation in her regret. So, Victoria let her stay. Not as a daughter. Not as a Newman. But as a soul seeking redemption. And in that quiet, broken truce, Genoa City held its breath. Because in a world built on power, lies, and legacy, the most dangerous thing of all had taken root, mercy. Let me know if you'd like a continuation focused on Jordan returning to retaliate, Victor's reaction to Claire staying in town, or a twist in which another DNA test suggests Claire may not have been lying entirely.